I've got some troubling news about England's royal family.
I think he'll change. He is committed to his own level of service, and that will remain.
Sirens faded as a blacked-out limousine slowed beneath palace lights. When a sharp command shattered protocol, Princess Anne halted Camilla's car after a guard noticed movement where none should be.
I think my mother did exactly the right thing. I think it's absolutely extraordinary.
Curtains shifted, radios crackled, security froze. In seconds, whispers raced through the gates. Who was inside? Was it a harmless mistake, or a secret powerful enough to stop a royal convoy cold? Today, we unravel the tense standoff, the decision, and the mystery passenger that left aides pale and Britain asking, who was hiding in the car? Question that froze the palace gates. The morning at Buckingham Palace carried a sharp, restless chill, the kind that settled into stone and iron and made every sound feel louder than it should. Late autumn had stripped the trees of their softness, leaving bare branches standing like silent witnesses along the palace drive. It should have been an ordinary departure. Camilla's official Bentley, polished to a deep reflective shine, rolled forward with the quiet confidence of routine, its tinted windows sealing in privacy as it moved toward the gates. For most watching, it was simply another royal car beginning another carefully scheduled journey. But routine, that morning, had already been broken. Moments before the Bentley reached the outer checkpoint, a palace guard monitoring garage activity noticed something that refused to sit right. It wasn't dramatic. There were no alarms, no raised voices, just a discrepancy on a screen and a timestamp that didn't match established procedure. The vehicle had remained in the garage longer than it should have. A stretch of minutes, 17 of them, unaccounted for. During that gap, access logs showed movement that hadn't been scheduled, credentials that appeared valid but were never meant to be used at that hour. It was the kind of detail most people would dismiss, the kind trained eyes were taught never to ignore. The report moved quickly, passed along with professional calm but unmistakable urgency, and it reached someone uniquely attuned to the weight of such irregularities. Princess Anne was already on palace grounds that morning, attending to her own tightly arranged duties. Known for her discipline and intolerance for disorder, she had spent a lifetime trusting preparation over assumption. When the alert reached her, it did not come wrapped in drama, just facts, concise and unsettling. Anne listened once. That was enough. As Camilla's Bentley advanced, the instruction came down without hesitation or consultation. The convoy was to stop, immediately. No explanations offered, no allowances made for appearances or convenience. At the palace gates, where movement was normally seamless and unquestioned, the sudden halt cut through the air like a held breath. Guards adjusted their positions, their expressions neutral but alert. The driver eased the Bentley to a controlled stop, confusion flickering behind practiced composure. Anne moved with purpose, her presence altering the atmosphere instantly. This was not protocol unfolding on its own. This was intervention. A calculated pause imposed by someone who understood exactly what was at stake when even a single detail went unexplained. Around her, the palace seemed to be quiet, as if the building itself recognized the seriousness of the moment. The explanation came quickly and quietly. An unexplained delay, unscheduled access, a vehicle briefly left outside the expected chain of supervision. Enough to raise concern. Enough to demand answers before the car went any farther. Anne stepped closer to the Bentley, her expression firm, unreadable. There was no accusation in her posture, no panic in her voice, only resolve. This was not about suspicion for its own sake. It was about certainty, about ensuring that nothing and no one moved forward under false assumptions. She paused, letting the moment settle, then asked the question that would change the course of the morning. It was simple, direct, impossible to ignore. Who else was in that car? But what if Anne already knew the answer, and stopping the car wasn't suspicion at all, but the opening move of a far bigger reckoning? Stay with us. When authority overrides routine. The question lingered in the air for only a moment before Princess Anne moved decisively, closing the distance between suspicion and action. There was no pause to weigh appearances, no glance around for approval. This was not a situation to be managed from a distance. Anne stepped fully into it herself, taking command with the quiet certainty that had defined her public life for decades. At Buckingham Palace, where procedure governed almost every movement, her presence alone signaled that routine had been suspended. Standard departure protocol would have allowed Camilla's Bentley to proceed once a brief verbal clarification was offered, and dismissed that option without comment. The irregularities flagged earlier that morning, the unexplained delay in the garage, the unscheduled access window, the credentials that technically checked out but felt wrong, were already enough to warrant more than reassurance. She had reviewed similar reports over the years and knew the pattern well. Small breaches were rarely isolated. They were warnings. With measured calm, Anne instructed that Camilla be informed of the situation. There was no urgency in her tone, but there was firmness. Camilla was asked to remain composed and step out of the vehicle while the matter was assessed. The request was handled with discretion, shielded from public view, ensuring that anyone beyond the palace gates would see nothing more than a brief pause in movement. Guards adjusted their positions smoothly, forming a subtle barrier that kept the scene contained and orderly. Camilla complied without protest. Years of public duty had taught her the value of restraint, and the seriousness in Anne's expression made it clear this was not a routine delay. As she exited the Bentley, the autumn air felt suddenly sharper, the quiet around the palace more pronounced. The car that moments ago had represented continuity and schedule now stood as a question mark on the drive. Anne remained focused. She referenced the earlier reports directly, speaking to the senior guard on duty and confirming the timeline once more. 17 minutes. An unsupervised window. An individual entering the garage without a corresponding work order. Each detail, recited plainly, reinforced why she had intervened. This was not conjecture. These were documented anomalies, noted and logged before the car ever reached the gates. Those who worked closely with Anne recognized the pattern. She was not one for dramatic displays, but neither did she tolerate gaps in accountability. Her reputation for discipline had been earned over years of military involvement, charitable leadership, and relentless adherence to duty. When she took control of a situation, it was because she believed the cost of inaction was higher than the inconvenience of disruption. The guards followed her direction without hesitation. This was now a controlled stop, executed cleanly and quietly. No radios crackled unnecessarily. No voices were raised. The scene remained invisible to the outside world.
Freely, please let us not become.
But within the palace grounds, the tension was unmistakable. What had begun as a routine departure had escalated into a matter of security. Anne turned her attention back to the Bentley, her gaze steady, her posture unmoving. Whatever explanation might come later, it would not replace verification. She issued the next instruction clearly and without embellishment. The vehicle was not to move again until it had been thoroughly checked inside and out by security personnel. Every compartment, every panel, every possible point of concealment was to be examined. As the order was relayed and officers moved into position, the morning at Buckingham Palace shifted once more, edging away from uncertainty and towards something far more serious, with answers yet to come and consequences already unfolding. Now, what secret could force Buckingham Palace into chaos in just 17 minutes? Who holds the shocking key? Keep watching. 17 minutes. That shouldn't exist. As security teams prepared to carry out Princess Anne's order, attention shifted backward in time to the moment the day first slipped off its expected course. The answer, Anne knew, would not be found at the palace gates but in the quiet, overlooked minutes inside the vehicle garage earlier that morning. This was where routine had quietly failed, and where something far more serious had begun. The footage was pulled up immediately. Anne insisted on watching it herself, standing beside the monitors with the same focus she brought to every official duty. The timestamp on the screen showed the early hours of the morning at Buckingham Palace, long before Camilla's Bentley was scheduled to depart. The garage appeared calm, almost empty, lit by steady overhead lights. Then, without urgency or concealment, an individual entered the frame. The person wore palace maintenance attire. At first glance, there was nothing overtly suspicious. The uniform was correct. The movement was confident, unhurried. That alone was unsettling. Those who did not belong often hesitated. This individual did not. They walked directly toward the Bentley, opened the driver's door, and climbed inside as if they had done it many times before. From that moment, the clock began counting the minutes that would soon dominate the investigation. 17 of them. No guards approached, no alarms were triggered, no supervisors were alerted. The Bentley remained stationary, its doors closed, its interior hidden from view. The cameras showed no activity outside the vehicle, no sign of disturbance, only stillness. Inside, however, no one could say what was happening. It was Officer Thomas Peaton who had first noticed the inconsistency. He had been on duty since early morning, monitoring routine movements with the quiet attentiveness that rarely earned recognition. When he reviewed the garage logs later, the timing did not align. A vehicle scheduled to remain under continuous supervision had not been. An individual had accessed it without a corresponding work order. Peaton did exactly what protocol demanded. He filed a report. No assumptions, just facts. Now, standing beside Anne as the footage replayed, those facts took on a different weight. The individual emerged from the Bentley exactly 17 minutes later. The door closed. The person walked away calmly, disappearing from view without looking back. There was no rush, no visible sign of concern. If anything, the body language suggested completion rather than interruption. Anne asked for the next layer of verification. Maintenance records were cross-checked. Staff rosters were reviewed. Names were compared. And then came the detail that shifted the atmosphere entirely. No one could identify the individual. The uniform was authentic, but it had not been issued to anyone scheduled to work in the garage that day. Supervisors confirmed it. The face on the screen did not belong to any member of the maintenance team assigned to vehicle access. That was the moment this stopped being a precaution. Someone had entered a royal vehicle using legitimate-looking credentials, spent nearly 20 minutes inside it, and left without challenge. No record, no authorization, no explanation. The uniform alone raised troubling questions. Has it been stolen, borrowed, or deliberately provided? Each possibility carried implications that extended beyond a single breach. Anne remained silent as the footage ended, her expression controlled but unmistakably severe. This was no longer about a delayed departure or a minor procedural error. It pointed to intent, preparation, and access. And whatever had happened inside that Bentley during those 17 minutes had been carefully planned, leaving behind nothing visible except a question that now echoed through the palace, demanding answers no one yet had. So how did a shadowy figure slip past palace security, vanish unseen, and leave a question echoing through corridors of power? Stay tuned. The silence beneath the seats. The footage ended, but its weight lingered. Pressing into the space around the monitors, Princess Anne did not voice her conclusion immediately. She didn't need to. The unanswered 17 minutes had already reshaped the morning. When she turned back toward the Bentley waiting near the palace gates, her decision was clear. Whatever had happened inside that car would not remain hidden behind assumptions or appearances. Security teams moved in under Anne's direct supervision, their actions precise and methodical. This was no hurried glance or symbolic check. The inspection began where most searches usually ended, inside the passenger compartment. But Anne made it clear from the outset that this would go further. Upholstery was examined, floor mats lifted, and door panels tested. Every movement was deliberate, each officer aware that even the smallest oversight could carry consequences. Anne watched closely, her posture rigid, her attention unwavering. She had seen enough over the years to know that threats rarely announced themselves openly. They were concealed in places people trusted, hidden where routine dulled vigilance. When the initial sweep showed nothing obvious, she did not relax. Instead, she issued a quiet instruction that shifted the tone of the operation. The inspection would extend beyond visible areas. Seats would be checked underneath, panels removed if necessary. No space would be assumed harmless simply because it appeared ordinary. An electronic surveillance specialist was summoned to the scene, his arrival subtle but telling. The equipment he carried was not for show. It was designed to detect what the eye could not see and the ear could not hear. As he moved through the Bentley, scanning slowly, the surrounding guards fell silent. Even Camilla, standing a short distance away, sensed the gravity of the moment. The car that had carried her countless times now felt unfamiliar, almost hostile. Minutes stretched, thick with expectation. Then the specialist paused, his expression changed, concentration sharpening into alert concern. He adjusted his position beneath the rear seating area, angling his torch and detection device with careful precision. What he found was small, easily overlooked, and devastating in its implications. A concealed listening device had been fixed beneath the seat frame, positioned to capture sound clearly, while remaining invisible during routine checks. The discovery landed with force. This was no accident, no careless error. The device had been placed with intent and knowledge, installed by someone who understood the vehicle's layout and the importance of discretion. Anne stepped closer as it was carefully documented and removed, her face set in controlled restraint. Years of discipline kept her reaction measured, but the seriousness of the breach was unmistakable. Without delay, she issued her next orders. Palace grounds were to be restricted immediately. Movement in and out would be limited until further notice. All royal vehicles, not just the Bentley, were to be flagged for inspection. If one car had been compromised, it would be reckless to assume others were untouched. Her voice carried authority without urgency, but every officer present understood the scale of what had just been uncovered. As the device was secured and taken for further analysis, a quiet realization settled over the group. This was not an isolated act. It was deliberate, planned, and executed with access that should never have been possible. Anne said what many were already thinking, the words falling heavy and undeniable. "This is coordinated." The phrase changed everything. It reframed the morning not as a single security scare, but as the opening of something much larger, something that had been unfolding unseen. The Bentley was no longer just a vehicle under inspection. It was evidence. And somewhere beyond the palace walls, someone had believed they could listen without being noticed, confident their presence would remain buried beneath routine and trust. So what did the hidden presence in Camilla's Bentley reveal? And who dared manipulate royal secrets right under everyone's eyes? Stay glued. When the pattern became impossible to ignore. The words Princess Anne had spoken moments earlier continued to hang in the air as security teams moved with renewed urgency. The discovery beneath the Bentley's seat had already crossed a line, but what followed erased any lingering doubt that this was a single, isolated intrusion. Orders were relayed swiftly through secure channels, and inspections began on other royal vehicles without delay. What had started as a focused response was now expanding, stretching across the palace grounds with quiet intensity. The next finding came sooner than anyone expected. In a vehicle assigned to Princess Anne herself, technicians detected a similar electronic signature. The device was hidden with the same care, positioned out of sight, installed by someone who understood exactly where it would go unnoticed. The realization struck hard. This was no longer a matter of proximity or chance. The operation had reached directly into Anne's own sphere, touching the very space meant to carry her safely through official duties. She absorbed the information without outward reaction, but the shift in her demeanor was unmistakable. This was personal now, not in an emotional sense, but in the clearest, most direct way. Whoever had planned this had not hesitated to target multiple senior members of the royal family, including the one now overseeing the response. The message was chilling in its confidence. The shock deepened when a third discovery was confirmed. Another device had been found in a vehicle used by a senior royal figure. Different cars. Same method. Same precision. Any remaining hope that this was a one-off breach dissolved instantly. The pattern was now undeniable. Someone had orchestrated a coordinated surveillance operation, deliberately spreading their reach across the monarchy's inner circle. For a brief moment, the palace felt suspended between disbelief and clarity. The implications were staggering. Conversations once assumed private, movements carefully planned, routines followed with trust in the systems designed to protect them. All of it may have been monitored. Not just Camilla, not just Anne. The institution itself had been quietly observed. Anne did not allow the weight of that realization to slow her. She understood the danger of hesitation in moments like this. If devices had been planted in multiple vehicles, the threat extended beyond privacy. It touched security, safety, and the integrity of the entire operation that shielded the royal family from harm. She issued the next directive firmly and without compromise. A full lockdown of the palace grounds was to be enforced. No unauthorized movement, no departures, no assumptions. At the same time, intelligence channels were to be activated at the highest level. This was no longer a matter for internal review alone. The sophistication, timing, and reach of the operation suggested resources and planning well beyond opportunistic intrusion. As the orders were carried out, the scale of the situation came into focus. This was not simply about discovering hidden devices. It was about confronting the possibility that someone had studied the monarchy closely, learned its rhythms, and exploited access meant only for trusted hands. The breach was both personal and institutional, striking at individuals while challenging the systems that bound them together. Anne stood at the center of it all, steady amid the rising tension. The stakes had widened dramatically. What began with a single halted limo had expanded into a reckoning that reached the heart of royal security. And with every new discovery, the question grew louder, not just who had done this, but how deeply they had already listened, and how far their intentions truly extended. Now, who could be lurking in plain sight, silently controlling royal secrets? And who is bold enough to risk everything to expose it? The clue. No one took seriously. At first. As the palace settled into lockdown and intelligence teams widened their reach, investigators turned their focus to the question that now sat at the center of everything. How had someone gained access so cleanly, so confidently, and without raising alarm? The answer began to take shape not through a dramatic breakthrough, but through a detail that had once seemed minor enough to fade into routine reports. Days earlier, 6 to be exact, a maintenance worker had filed a quiet complaint. His locker had been broken into. A spare palace-issued uniform was missing. At the time, it had been logged as an internal security matter. Inconvenient, but not alarming. Uniform thefts, while rare, were not unheard of in large institutions. No immediate threat had been attached to it. Now, in the light of what had been discovered beneath royal car seats, that forgotten report returned with unsettling clarity. Investigators reconstructed the timeline carefully. The stolen uniform disappeared nearly a week before the halted Bentley incident. 11 days before the devices were discovered. 11 days. The same length of time surveillance data now showed recorded conversations had been captured. The alignment was too precise to dismiss. The uniform had not been taken randomly. It had been acquired as a key, one that unlocked movement through restricted spaces without challenge. Princess Anne reviewed the findings herself, reading through summaries compiled by intelligence analysts and technical specialists. Her expression remained composed, her posture unchanged, but those closest to her could sense the restraint it took. The reports detailed how the listening devices had been active for nearly 2 weeks, triggered by sound and motion, recording conversations inside vehicles assumed to be secure, discussions about schedules, personal exchanges, fragments of private life never meant to leave the confines of a moving car. Anne absorbed every line in silence. Anger was there, unmistakable, but disciplined. This was not the anger of shock. It was the anger of understanding exactly what had been violated. Someone had not only listened, but had done so patiently, deliberately, and for profit or power. The precision of the installations, the quality of the equipment, and the careful placement all pointed in the same direction. This was professional work. Further analysis confirmed it. The devices were not crude or improvised. They were commercially available but expertly deployed, chosen for reliability and concealment rather than spectacle. This was not curiosity-driven intrusion. It was paid surveillance, designed to gather usable intelligence over time without detection. The final piece of the picture came through signal tracing. Specialists followed the electronic trail left behind when the devices transmitted data. The signals did not remain within palace walls. They led outward, converging toward an off-site receiver location several miles away, a place chosen carefully, close enough to maintain connection, far enough to remain unseen. Whoever was listening had positioned themselves just beyond the palace's immediate perimeter, confident in their access and their anonymity. For Anne, the implications settled heavily. This was no longer about recovering from a breach. It was about confronting the reality that the monarchy itself had been treated as a target, studied, monitored, and exploited. The stolen uniform, once dismissed as a minor theft, had become the thread that unraveled the entire operation. And now that thread had been pulled tight, pointing investigators outward, toward whoever believed they could move unseen, listen freely, and walk away without consequence. Who could be hiding behind the palace walls, watching every move, manipulating events? And how far will they go before being exposed? The question that changed everything. The quiet hum of the city was broken only by the distant wail of sirens as a convoy of unmarked vehicles slipped through the narrow streets of central London. Inside, Detective Carter's heart pounded with a mix of adrenaline and disbelief. The surveillance hub they were about to raid had long been whispered about in closed circles, an off-the-books operation, meticulously hidden, yet somehow leaving a trail of breadcrumbs that only the most observant could follow. And Anne had followed every one of them. As the team breached the hub, chaos erupted in a flurry of shouts and the metallic clang of doors forced open. Computers clicked and screens flickered under the harsh fluorescent lights, revealing row upon row of monitors and filing cabinets stacked with digital and physical evidence. Arrests were made swiftly, with several low-level operators stunned into silence, caught in the act of handling files that were never meant to see the light of day. Anne's eyes froze on a series of folders labeled with the names of senior royals. Each one was carefully catalogued, some with notes scribbled in shorthand, others marked with symbols that hinted at a hierarchy of secrecy. It was a revelation that sent a chill down her spine, proof that the operation reached far beyond ordinary surveillance, into the intimate corridors of palace life. The implications were staggering, and yet the raid had gone off without a single misstep. Privately, Anne was commended for her decisive action. Her instinct to stop the car, to push past protocol, had prevented a potential disaster from spiraling further. As she sifted through the files, her mind kept returning to the small, seemingly inconsequential moments that had shaped the outcome. If that guard hadn't spoken up, if a single signal had been missed, the truth might have remained hidden. Every detail mattered. Every choice, every hesitation had consequences that rippled through the corridors of power. Anne felt a quiet weight of responsibility, a mixture of pride and apprehension, knowing she had been at the center of a revelation that could redefine trust at the highest levels. Yet even amid the triumph, questions lingered like shadows. Who had been hiding in the car, and who had sent them there in the first place? The answer, for now, remained just out of reach, a puzzle threaded with tension and secrecy. Anne stared at the files, her gaze drifting from one name to another, imagining the ripple effect each revelation could have if exposed. The room was filled with evidence, arrests, and answers. But still, one question loomed larger than all, the one that had changed everything. So, what do you think the shocking discovery in that car means for the royals, and who could have orchestrated it? We'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe.